Hey everybody, today's video is about something that a lot of people have been asking me about for a long time, and it's something in the Beatles' history that doesn't get talked about all that much, and it really surprises a lot of people. And what that is how Rubber Soul, the Beatles' 1965 album, has two different stereo mixes. Yes, so now we're going to get in depth about this as to how it ended up getting two different stereo mixes and where you can find both of these stereo mixes. Now, Rubber Soul, of course, was originally released in 1965. This happens to be a pressing from 1969. There goes Bobby, by the way. But Rubber Soul released in 1965, and obviously just one of the greatest albums ever made by anybody. And by the way, we are talking about the UK version of Rubber Soul. So, just an excellent album. And the original 1965 mix of Rubber Soul, it is very unique in the sense that it has very wide stereo separation, and it has a lot of the time it has the vocals panned pretty hard right and most of the instruments panned pretty hard left, or vice versa. But either way, it's kind of got some pretty drastic panning. That's because in 1965, the Beatles were using a four-track recording machine, and really that kind of limits you in the sense of where you can put things in the stereo image, especially with the Beatles, because they were bouncing down quite often. Now, this is kind of a technical recording process, but the best way I can describe it is you have four tracks, and if the Beatles are going to record, let's say they want to record drums all on one track, both the guitars by John and George on one track, and then Paul's bass on another track. You have three tracks already filled up, and you haven't even put the vocals on yet. So a lot of times what they would do is they would take those three tracks they just recorded, the drums, the guitars, and the bass, and bounce those all down to the empty track, so that now all of the instruments, the drums, the bass, the guitars, are all on one track, leaving three tracks open. And of course, on the three tracks, they may add like a tambourine percussion part, and then the lead vocals and the backing vocals. But what that means is that all the instruments are then locked in to that one track. So if you want to make a stereo mix, you either have to put it right in the middle, which is kind of a more modern thing to do, or you can pan it to one side along with those vocals to another side as well. So that's kind of how the 65 stereo mix was originally made. Another important thing to think about is that in 1965, stereo, especially in the UK, stereo was still a new thing, and most kids and most people didn't even own a hi-fi stereo system. A lot of people just had a mono record player, like a portable record player, or just a mono stereo system at home that had one speaker. So the mono mix was really the mix that the Beatles themselves really cared about the most. And when it came time to do the stereo mix, it was left up to George Martin and the engineers Norman Smith, and they created the best stereo mix they could make at that time. That being said, the 65 stereo mix sounds very good. Now, we will be doing a comparison between the 65 stereo mix and the 1980s remix. But first, let's now talk about the 1980s, I think it's 86, I'm going to call it 86, I might be wrong with that date, the remix done by George Martin. So here's a little backstory here. So in the mid-1980s, the Beatles' back catalog had not been released on CD, and of course CDs came out kind of in the early 1980s, so the Beatles were late to the game getting their music onto CD. So the task was left up to George Martin to put out the Beatles' music on CD, and when they were going to release the first four albums, by the way, these are all the UK editions, of course, the first four albums, Please Please Me, With the Beatles, Hard Day's Night, and Beatles for Sale, the people at EMI they were going to release the albums as the stereo mixes for those albums. George Martin stopped them and said the stereo mixes are not good for Please Please Me and With the Beatles. And I don't think he even liked the stereo mixes for Hard Day's Night or Beatles for Sale. And he convinced them to release those albums in mono. So the original 4 Beatles albums released in the 1980s are just the mono mixes of those albums. Then, when it came time to release the next batch of CDs, which would be Help and Rubber Soul, and then Revolver and Sgt. Pepper, George Martin was then given the task of, okay, if you don't like the stereo mixes for Help and Rubber Soul, then why don't you remix them? So that's exactly what he did. And he initially called the stereo mixes for Help and Rubber Soul woolly. That was his exact quote. They sound kind of woolly. Now, I think he's obviously referring to this idea that the vocals were just panned on one side and the instruments were panned on an opposite side, leaving the middle pretty empty. That's not actually truly the case, though, because the original mix, while it is at times a little imbalanced, I wouldn't call it woolly. That's not really something I would call it. Anyway, flash forward to the 80s. It's like 1986-ish, and George Martin goes in the studio, and for this case, we're just going to talk about Rubber Soul. He then gets the original master tape of Rubber Soul, so the original 4-track tape, and he remixes the album and tries to keep it as similar to the original 1965 recordings, or mix rather, as possible. And he does a really, really, really good job. There are some problems, though, because in 1986, he didn't have at his disposal at that time, he didn't have the original reverb that was available in 1965, which was the EMI reverb. EMI Studios had its own reverb chambers and other plate reverb we could get from inside the studios. George Martin used digital reverb on the new remix, and he also did some other slight things as well that were a little bit problematic. Now, let's talk about these major differences in these two albums. But first, let me show you. So this is this is a 2009 remaster. This is from the 2012 Beatles stereo box set that was released. And so this is the stereo version of Rubber Soul. Now, the interesting thing is that when they did the 09 remasters, they used George Martin's 1987 remixes for Help and Rubber Soul. So this is the one you get. And there's also some problems with that as well, which we will then talk about. But this is the, we'll call this the 87 remix, and then this is the original 65 stereo mix. So the first thing off the bat that I can hear when I listen to these two mixes is that the 65 mix has very, very different sounding reverb. Not quite as much reverb on the 65 mix compared to the 87 mix, which has a bit more reverb and a different sounding reverb. Now, if you're just a casual listener, it probably won't matter that much to you. But if you are someone like me who listens to Rubber Soul a lot and listens to it over and over again and really like digs into it and tries to like dissect each little thing about it, then hearing the different reverbs is a very, very big deal. And digital reverb compared to original analog reverb is a big thing, because digital reverb, the best way I can describe it is digital reverb is like a sharp knife, and then analog reverb is like a big warm blanket. So you have sharp, kind of like cold vibe about it, and then like a warm, kind of rounded vibe about it. And obviously, when it comes to music, in my opinion, I think the warm, rounded vibe is quite a bit better. So the reverb right off the bat is a major difference. The other difference, of course, is that it's impossible for George Martin to make an identical mix to the original 1965 mix. So you get a little bit of a different sound. You get some instruments fading up at different times, going down at different times. For example, like on In My Life, on the original 1965 mix, you have that really, really great piano solo in the middle that George Martin has to be playing. On the 65 mix, after the very end of it, it fades down pretty quickly, like pretty harshly. On the 87 remix, it's a little bit more of a smooth transition. So there's just little things like that that you get between the two different mixes. And of course, the other major mix difference from the 87 mix and the 65 mix is that on the 65 mix, of course, you get the vocals panned pretty hard to one side. On the 87 mix, he tried to fix a lot of that by making the vocals not as hard panned and a little bit more to the center, as well as sometimes with the bass, tried to make the bass a little bit more centered as well, which is kind of nice, but not a big deal really in my opinion. So the two mixes are quite different. Now, let's get to a little bit of a part where it gets a little bit weird. So the CDs come out in 1987, and you know people generally like those CDs. There were some complaints, but we're not going to talk about that right now. So when the CDs came out in 87, it basically made it so that the 1965 mix was just EMI and Apple were going to just forget about that original 65 mix, and from that point on, just release the George Martin 1987 mix. Now, that's a bit of a problem, of course, because for those that grew up with the original stereo mix of Rubber Soul, you couldn't get it on CD. Flash forward to the 2009 remaster campaign that happened. That happens to be this CD that I took from my stereo remaster box set. And when this came out, it features the George Martin 1987 mix. And the big problem with that is that they didn't go back to the actual master tapes. They went back to George Martin's 16-bit, yes, not 24-bit, which all the other ones were taken from the actual master tapes. 16-bit DAT master of the 87 Rubber Soul mix. That's very, very problematic, and I will try to explain that for those maybe who don't understand. So when you when they make a master tape of an album, they put it onto a master tape, and it's on that actual tape. And then when they go to take it from that tape and put it onto CD, they transfer it in either 8-bit, which is very, very poor. That's like video game sounds. Then there's 16-bit, and then there's 24-bit and 32-bit, and it goes up and all that kind of stuff. But on most CDs, it's 24-bit. But for some reason, when George Martin back in the 80s did the transfer, he put it onto DAT. Now DAT is it's a form of tape, but it's a digital tape. It's almost like a VHS in a way. I could be describing that very, very wrong, but it's kind of like that is basically the idea. And at that time, you could only get 16-bit when you were doing it. Now 16-bit isn't terrible. Most people probably wouldn't be able to tell 16-bit between 16-bit and 24-bit, but when it comes to the Beatles, you want the best you can possibly get. And in 2009, when they were making these new stereo remasters, it's so crazy that they would take the source from a 16-bit DAT tape, as opposed to going back to the actual master tapes of the 65 mix, which they could have transferred in 24-bit, which would have been so much better. But they didn't do that, and that's just really, really too bad. So you get the 87 mix by George Martin on the 2009 stereo remasters, and with that, of course, you get the not as good reverb, the new George Martin mix, and just etc. etc. By the way, this goes that also goes for the Help album as well. So that's what happened when it came to the 2009 remasters. Also, that was true when they, in 2012, released the 2009 stereo masters on to vinyl. They again used the exact same master tape from the George Martin 87 mix and pressed it to vinyl. So you get the exact same mix with the same reverb and everything on this. So this is the 87 stereo mix on CD and on vinyl. And these are both readily available to this day. You can find both of these very, very easily. Here's where it gets tricky. So let's say you've heard this. Obviously, everyone's probably by this point heard the 2009 stereo masters on either vinyl or CD or on Spotify. That's the one that's available online. Let's say you want to hear the original 1965 stereo mix of Rubber Soul, rather. Well, if you want to hear it on vinyl, on record, it's a little bit easier to obtain. So, this is my pressing from my personal collection. This is a 1969 pressing of Rubber Soul, and I'll show you what this looks like. UK pressing, by the way, I should say. This is on the Parlophone black and silver label. And this is, again, the 1965 original stereo mix of Rubber Soul. So if you wanted to find this original mix on vinyl, you'd either get, an original Parlophone black and yellow label. Any of those would be the original mix. Any of what I just showed you on this label would be the original mix as well. That's the way you could find that. Those are pretty easy to still find online. Granted, some are better than others, of course, but that's the way you could do it if you wanted to get the original UK stereo mix on vinyl. Now, when it comes to getting it on CD, this is where it gets very, very, very difficult. At this point, the only way to get the original 1965 stereo mix of Rubber Soul on CD is this guy right here. This is from the release in 2000. Let me get this right. Yeah, 2014. Or actually, no, 2012. The mono remasters of. Actually, I'm totally wrong. Let's back that up. Let's back it up. This is from the 09 mono remasters, and this is the mono Rubber Soul. This is from the mono box, and I will have a picture of it in the corner over here because I forgot to bring mine out. This is from the mono box, and someone, I don't know, I would love to give credit to this person. Somebody at EMI or Apple, somebody up there suggested, whatever, that with the mono box, they should also include the original 65 stereo mixes for Help and Rubber Soul. And they did just that. So on the Help album and on Rubber Soul, like I'm holding right here, you get the mono album, the complete mono album. So the first 14 tracks on here, the original 1965 mono mix. Then the next 14 tracks are the original 1965 stereo mix, and it sounds absolutely brilliant. I love it so much on this CD. It sounds great. I listen to it on my home stereo, listen to it in my car, on my studio monitors, on my computer, and it's just excellent. It's an excellent sounding CD. I don't praise CDs all that much, but this is one that is so fantastic. They really stayed true to the original vinyl version of the 65 mix, in my opinion. It it just sounds great. It sounds warm, and it's so wonderful. And it's such a crime that you can only find it on this CD. And the reason that it's a crime, in my opinion, is because the original, the mono remasters box set that came out, they did not make that many copies of it. It was a limited edition release. It's not currently available. If you want to find a mono box, you have to go on eBay or wherever and get it from a reseller. And they're really, really expensive at this point. So you had to get on the wagon early and pick up the box set in order to get the 65 stereo mix of Rubber Soul and Help. And I really, really think that it's a disservice to Beatle fans that they didn't offer the original 65 stereo mix on the more commonly and still readily available '09 remasters, because they could have easily put the 87 remix that they have on here, which is on here right now. They could have easily put that with the 65 stereo mix on the CD as well. It would have totally fit, and it wouldn't have cost them anything extra other than just transferring it like they did for the mono box set, which, by the way, these were both released and put together at the exact same time. So it really doesn't make sense that the only way to find the 65 stereo mix on CD is in the mono box set. That does not make sense. It's very confusing, but that's how it is. So that's a little bit of a back history of the 1965 stereo mix of Rubber Soul and the 1987 George Martin remix of Rubber Soul. I know it's kind of confusing, but hopefully in the comments below, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Or if maybe I said something that was a little bit incorrect, please correct me. I'd be happy. I'm always happy to get things right. But yeah, that's my explanation of the 1965 stereo mix and the 1987 stereo mix. And I think you all know what I prefer. Obviously, it's the 1965 original stereo mix. You can't beat it. It's brilliant. It's beautiful. It's analog. It's everything you want when it comes to the Beatles. That being said, do I hate the 87 remix? No, I don't hate it. It's got its own value. Yeah, that's my take on Rubber Soul, the stereo mix, the two stereo mixes. So please, in the comments below, let me know what you think, and hey, which one do you prefer? 65, 87. And that's it for now, and talk to you soon.